I identified the just extreme, obviously bigoted rhetoric of someone like Pete Hegseth, who literally says, like, I believe in a crusade. The crusade is against Islam. We should all be a part of a giant global crusade against Islam. Right. That's pretty explicit. But what you're talking about also is the way that dehumanization goes far beyond Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, that it permeates the culture, that it permeates the media, and, you wouldn't ever hear that same kind of rhetoric from Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. But the question of how much you value people's lives and the policy, there is less difference than those who might like to cast Trump as an aberrant bigot would want to think.
I travel the world frequently. I'm out of the country right now. I travel the Muslim world, and not just the Muslim world, but across the world. There's never been more anti-American sentiment, that I can remember in my lifetime. And that was on Joe Biden's watch. Let's just be real here. And America was viewed as a more racist country and a more bigoted country because people around the world saw the horror of Gaza. And that was on Biden's watch. And we never pulled back the bombs. We kept on funding the erasure of the Palestinian people. And if you just look at the United Nations and you look at the votes that come in, it's always a singular veto. And that was Biden's veto. It's always a singular nation that stands up against the self-determination of the Palestinian people. And so that happened on Biden's watch. So while Biden wouldn't use the racist rhetoric of Donald Trump, I think it's important for people to take a moment. And this is where becoming more read in Dr. King's literature, for example. And I actually want to explicitly thank like Dr. Bernice King and the stances that she took on Gaza and said that this is what my father would have said about Gaza. Dr. King talked about not just racism, but militarism and poverty as a three-headed monster of America. Militarism in the global arena is the number one manifestation of white supremacy. And what America did in that arena under Joe Biden was extremely problematic. And the entire world, I think, ingested that in a way that horrified them. So it's important for us to say that, look, there's no doubt that Trump is an evil, lowly human being, a racist bigot who should be challenged in every way by a broad coalition of Americans of conscience. I agree with that. We need to step up to the plate. We have to show courage in the face of this bigotry. We have to be able to unite in the face of this bigotry and address it in all of its manifestations. But in order to do that, you're going to have to be very honest about why he was able to win in the first place. And the reality is that many communities were extremely frustrated with the Democratic Party. Yeah. And a lot of people stayed home. And many people, it's not just those that voted for Donald Trump because he exploited those frustrations. Many people stayed home. Many people voted third party because it was like, well, look, we don't want flowery rhetoric.
Well,
with the same type of brutal policies.
I saw a clip of you 5 months or so ago, before the election, giving this warning to the Democratic Party and saying, if what you promise on God, you have to understand there are a lot of voters in swing states who are disgusted, who are repulsed when they see the annihilation of Gaza. And they see it happen, it being funded, being armed by the United States under the Biden administration. And they're not fooled by the fact that the Biden administration says they're working for a ceasefire. They understand that the Biden administration is keeping the conflict going by supplying the arms. And you said in the clip that I saw, you said, they don't want just some uplifting rhetoric about how, the Biden administration believes in peace or whatever. They need Kamala Harris to take a stance, which she very pointedly declined to do. She wouldn't meet with Gaza families. She, was dismissed at the I'm speaking thing when the protesters came up. And
they wouldn't even tokenize if I was a Democratic insider, I would say use the DNC to at least tokenize the Palestinian community, give a voice to Like, it was
Strategically, yeah.
like that was Democratic
Yeah.
Center. Like, at least
Yeah.
try. And they
Yeah.
didn't let a Palestinian speaker onto the stage. I mean, it was pathetic. And what I say now is that, look, I see a mistake that's being made, by the way, and I want to be very open about that mistake. There are those that are punching down at communities and beating up on communities and saying, "See, you refuse to vote
Mm.
for Kamala Harris, and this is what you get." That's not, no. Be self-critical, be introspective, and ask yourself why these communities that are in the direct line of harm of Donald Trump, and definitely, a greater proportionality of that harm, why they didn't vote for you, why you didn't listen to them. Like, be
Yeah.
self-critical. If the Democrats are just going to continue to say, "Ha, we told you so," and you get what you get what you voted for, what you didn't vote for, you're never going to learn. Like, you cannot,
Yeah.
speak in such a condescending way to the communities, the most marginalized and hurt communities domestically and globally, and then expect them to continue to buy into this lesser of the two evils. Because what a lot of people said this election was, if the lesser of two evils is genocide that's disguised with rhetoric of concern, then I don't want the lesser of two evils.
Mm.
If that's the lesser of two evils, then the lesser of two, at some point, the lesser of two evils becomes too evil to bring
Yeah.
people in and say that, well, you're warding off the greater harm. That's your fault. And so
Yeah.
they need to be introspective and to ask themselves why that happened. And you can't hide. Look, according to Lancet, which was, a respectable medical journal, you're talking about over 200,000 people have been killed
Yeah.
in Gaza, right? I mean, 60,000 is just what's been found. People are going back to their homes now for however long this ceasefire, lasts, and they're finding skulls in the rubble. They're finding their loved ones buried. Like, we don't have an accurate count. You can't hide
Yeah.
all these dead babies. I mean, for many Americans of conscience, it didn't take much, to just see, like, at what point is a
Mhm.
war crime, and why does the whole world see Gaza differently than our politicians? Because the reality is that there's not a country on earth that speaks of this conflict the same way the United States does. So either the whole world has got it wrong, and the U.S. is this beacon of moral truth that somehow figured it out,
Mhm.
or we have a fundamental problem with the way that our politics and our policies work. And I think that most people of common sense would say that the latter is true. And it doesn't take much, humanity from a person to see what happens in Gaza and to be horrified by the fact that those are our tax dollars. That the Biden
Mhm.
administration did not once say to Netanyahu, this deranged lunatic, an international war criminal, that enough is enough.
Well,
That
he
we
was applauded in Congress in the middle of the killing, you know.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's disappointing. It's disheartening. I mean, I think that most Muslims would tell you that they've lost a lot of friends in the last year and a half because, many of the same people that said that they were horrified by Donald Trump's rhetoric and Trump 1.0 somehow morally justified the annihilation of Gaza.
Mm.
And what I tell people, and one of the things I said when I went to DC, and by the way, I think that what's really important to point out is that the pro-Palestinian movement in the United States is an incredible multi-faith movement. In fact, most of the encampments had a sizable Jewish presence.
Right.
Some of the encampments had a larger Jewish presence than a Muslim presence. When I gave the Friday sermon on the White House, in front of the White House, sometime in November 2023 or December 2023, I forget, there were more non-Muslims that were there than Muslims. And one of the things that I put forth then in the protests that we had over 300,000 people come out the first time, over 400,000 people come out the second time. So we're talking about two of the largest protests in the history of DC. Is that, I get these news alerts where, where my name is mentioned in an article or whatever it may be, right? And my name was mentioned in an article, and it happened to be one of the Palestinian victims who had my name. One of the children that was killed had my name. And what people in Gaza were doing was they were writing with markers. They were writing the names of the children on their arms, so that if they had to pull them out of the rubble, they could be identifiable by the names of the children on the arms. And so I wrote my name on my arm. And I wanted to put forth that here I am. Look, I'm as New Orleans of a boy as they come. I love New Orleans. I grew up in New Orleans. My cuisine is New Orleans. Everything about me is New Orleans. But I'm also a Palestinian American, and
Yeah.
my parents are victims of that same displacement that Donald Trump is suggesting. Now, let's just go empty out Gaza and send these people elsewhere. Open ethnic cleansing plans. That could have been me. Like that child, if my parents did not
Yeah.
find a way to resettle themselves in New Orleans at some point. You know, my parents met separately at the University of Houston, and they ended up in New Orleans. That's where I was born. If that didn't happen, that could have easily been me. And I gave people this incident. One of the hardest things that happened is 1 week after October 7th, Joe Biden parroted the lie, which is now an openly discredited lie, that there were 40 beheaded Israeli babies. This is factually untrue at this point. Every commission has found it to be a complete baseless lie. When the president parrots that, what happened is that there was a man in Chicago who murdered a 6-year-old Palestinian boy. He stabbed him over 20 times and stabbed his mother 13 times. Murdered the boy. The mother barely escaped death. Wadir al-Fayoum, 6-year-old boy. When he saw his landlord, this was his landlord. When he saw him, he ran up to him to give him a hug, because that's what the nature of the relationship was like before this all happened. But that man was listening to the news, and he had ingested, unfortunately, this idea that these people are going to grow up to behead us. And he wanted to take revenge on this innocent 6-year-old Palestinian boy who ran up to him to give him a hug. I went to that funeral. I've been closely in touch with Wadir's mother since. There was legislation that was attempted to be passed. It was a whole circus. Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and the rest of that bunch immediately erased Wadir. I mean, they pretended like Wadir's mom wasn't even in the chamber and just started talking about campus protests and things of that sort. That 6-year-old boy, Palestinian American boy, stabbed over 20 times. I mean, for all practical purposes, beheaded. His mother was in the hospital, not able to come to the funeral because she was in the hospital recovering from her own injuries. I suddenly got a bunch of my allies, quote unquote allies, from the first Trump administration, right? When we fought that bigotry together, cross coalition, right? And I'm sorry for your loss, and it's devastating. And I saw that you were there in Chicago. I saw that you were there at that funeral. And my response was, what's the difference between Wadir and the tens of thousands of Palestinian children that have been killed? And then what's the difference between Wadir and those tens of thousands of children and me? And so what is it with this selective, condolence of yours? Because you're actively justifying the murder of Palestinian babies back there. So it's important for people to reckon with their moral inconsistencies. If we're going to form true societal harmony, then we need to humanize each other beyond the moment of political opportunism. Because Muslims felt like a convenient checkbox in Trump 1.0. The Muslim ban was just something that you could rally progressives and rally liberals around.
Yeah.
And Muslims were a convenient checkbox. But
right. Yeah. And what Biden did to Gaza, much more consequential for human beings than even the Muslim ban, right? The Muslim ban is morally horrifying, but you mentioned 200,000 estimated dead in Gaza. That number is going to increase because obviously a lot of people have injuries, a lot of war, and it doesn't even begin to count injury, trauma, lifelong trauma from the things that people have seen, the annihilation of every part of the infrastructure of Gaza, the consequences of living in tents, in rubble. I mean, it's really difficult to even comprehend. And then you had, as you mentioned, Biden pushing things that were false. Another thing that he said was, he was early on casting doubt on Palestinian death statistics. Right. He was saying, the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, we don't trust what they say. Well, it turns out the death statistics are a massive undercount.
Yes. So this is what happened, by the way, in the lead up to the election. It's important to actually note that when Democratic candidates came to the Muslim communities, what they said was, we know that y'all are unhappy about Gaza, but remember the Muslim ban? It's like, you've got to be incredibly, unaware or just nefarious, right? To try to minimize what's happening in Gaza by saying, remember the Muslim ban and how bad that was and how we came to your defense. Like, that does not work. Now, I find it morally indefensible to support Donald Trump, no matter how frustrated we were. I don't find it. So I want to be very clear so that I cannot. Yeah. But I also think that it's important for sort of a critical re-examination of how Islamophobia has actually been tolerated and embedded into policies across the aisle now. And there is no greater manifestation of that than anti-Palestinian bigotry, which is right now, I mean, we're looking at the viability. You know, we used to talk about the viability of a Palestinian state. The two-state solution is dead. Netanyahu openly talks about how we will never allow a Palestinian state to happen. I mean, this is the idea of a Palestinian state is dead in terms of the two-state solution. Now we're just talking about Palestinian existence. And these people are openly trying to erase Palestinians. And so it's important for everyone to understand that every American, well, I don't want to say every American Muslim, most American Muslims that you will meet see themselves in the Palestinians. Okay? Like, we're not separating ourselves, because we understand that if this group of people can be dehumanized to the extent that every imaginable form of torture can be carried out against them using our tax dollars, and most people will turn a blind eye to it, then it could happen to any one of us. It could happen to our entire American Muslim community. That's not to say we're the only targeted community. That's not to say we're the only community at risk here. We're absolutely not. But that is to say that, you know, it's important for Americans of all backgrounds to recognize just how consequential this genocide has been on how American Muslims view themselves in the greater fabric of society.
And there's more where that came from at patreon.com/current affairs. Go there, subscribe to the Current Affairs podcast. Current Affairs is an independent, non-profit media organization. We need your support. Thanks for listening.